there were 17 goals and you had to choose one. And each group chose, some of you chose similar goals and some of you chose very different ones. How do you know that the goal that you have chosen to raise awareness about is the right goal? How do you know it's the most important goal? How do you know it's the best goal for you to be focusing your resources and your time on? For example, climate change. The group at the back chose climate action. Not everyone would agree that climate action is the best goal to be focusing on. Obviously you don't, because not everyone chose climate action. It depends on the context. For example, I've seen on TV, I've seen Brazilian farmers who live on the outskirts of the rainforest protesting that Europeans should stop telling them to stop cutting down the trees, because they say, well, they cut down their forests a long time ago. So in addition to the context in which we find ourselves, it's also our subjectivity. You're all in the same room, but you chose different goals. So our subjectivity has a part to play in how we choose the best idea or the best goal. And our subjectivity is driven by our beliefs, our assumptions, our values. For example, it's my belief that we spend far too much time defending our own points of view, our own perspectives, and not enough time trying to understand another's perspective, their point of view from their own unique position in the context that they're in. And these beliefs, the subjectivity, my assumption is that the way you've chosen these goals is the same way, the thought process is very, very similar to the way we choose anything. We're influenced through our beliefs, whether we're judging someone's idea, whether we're judging someone's performance, or whether we're marking assignments. The thought process in how we actually come to that judgment is very, very similar. Let me give you an example. As part of my assessor training, I was in a room with 26 assessors, and we were given a task to evaluate, to make a judgment about an apprentice, and we had to watch 3 videos. In the first video, the apprentice was engaged in a professional discussion with an assessor. In the second video, it was an observation. The apprentice was making a long phone call. It was a half-hour phone call to a client, and we had to make a judgment on the observation. And in the third video, he was engaged in he had to showcase his project, which is something that most of you in this room will have to do when you do your endpoint assessment. And based on those 3 pieces of evidence, these 26 assessors, we had to grade this apprentice as either a fail, pass, or distinction. It was a level 3 customer service apprenticeship, so there was no merit in that grading thing. So it was 3 grades: fail, pass, or distinction. Now, the assessors, 26 of us, similar level of qualification, similar level of experience. And you'll be shocked to know that in the first task, 13 of us thought that the apprentice should pass, and the other 13 failed him. In the second task, everyone passed him, and in the third task, there were a handful of people who gave him a distinction, and the others passed him. So overall, for the apprentice to pass, they needed to pass each of those 3 tasks. So that meant that on the basis of exactly the same evidence, similar level of experienced assessors, some of us would have failed that apprentice, and some of us would have given him a distinction overall. How does that happen? Well, it's a combination of subjectivity and the context. So let's break it down. So subjectivity. As I said earlier, our subjectivity is driven through our psychological thought processes. First of all, identity. Some of us identify as being kind assessors. So those of us who are kind may have been more lenient than those who identify as being fair assessors. Some people value fairness over kindness. They think, well, if you're being kind to this person, you're not being fair to all the other apprentices who will be examined in a similar way. So they have their identity is I'm a fair assessor, whereas somebody else might say I'm a kind assessor. I value compassion, and it's obvious that this apprentice is competent, so I'll be compassionate and give them the benefit of the doubt. Whereas another assessor will think, well, no, integrity is much more important than compassion or kindness. So our values will drive us to make a different judgment, because either we err on the side of favouring the candidate, or we err on the side of being harsh and thinking, well, that's fair to everyone else. Our beliefs will influence how we judge. Some of us believe in being very analytical, so we'll break everything down and we'll try to be very logical in the way we make a judgment. And others, we believe more in synthesis. We believe in forming an overall picture and synthesizing and thinking, well, overall, what do we think? Is this apprentice competent, or are they not competent overall? Our level of expertise. If you're a novice assessor, if you're a novice as a driving instructor or anything else that you might be making judgments in, if you're a novice, then you might overlook things which a more experienced judge would have seen and noted, well, no, they made a mistake here, whereas the novice might have overlooked that. And so the novice might be more lenient than normal, and on the other hand, the novice may be harsher than normal, because the novice might think, well, I know that my judgment is going to be challenged, therefore I'm going to make sure that all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, because no one can challenge me on this. On the other hand, the highly experienced assessor might be more confident. So because they're very confident, they know that everything is not equally important. So they might overlook some of the mistakes that the apprentice made, because they know that in the general kind of picture that's not really that important. They have the confidence to know that. So they might be more lenient, or they might be harsher, because they might think, well, they might notice things that the novice might not have noticed, and so therefore they pick up on things which the novice has missed. The range of experience is very important. So this was a customer service apprentice. Now, not everyone is highly experienced in that domain. So there might have been assessors who normally they assess engineering apprentices, but they were asked to assess a customer service one, which is not their normal domain. So therefore, because it's not their normal domain, ideas that the apprentice articulated, they might have overlooked these ideas. It was unfamiliar to them, so they didn't notice the importance of that. Whereas someone who only assesses customer service apprentices, and they have assessed thousands of similar apprentices, for them, their performance was mundane compared with the diverse range of others that they had seen. So therefore their judgment would not be the same as someone who had limited experience of that. Our state of mind is important. Some of these assessors had driven long distances. They might have been tired, they might have been anxious, they might have been stressed. So you know that the judgments that we make when we're feeling stressed and in a bad mood are not the same always as the judgments we make when we're in a very good mood. We're feeling very happy, and we want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and other times we're more critical than normal based on our state of mind, how we're feeling, how we've slept. Unconscious biases. We all have unconscious biases. We all form judgments of people based on how they're dressed, based on their hairstyle, based on how similar or dissimilar they look to the kind of people that we normally like. So some of the assessors, they might have looked at this apprentice and thought, yes, I can see that he is a really good, this person worked in the NHS on reception, customer service, so I can see him doing his job really well then, based on my previous experience. And otherwise, unconscious biases, some people might have assumed that he doesn't really look as competent. And this is nothing to do with what he said, but this is just to do with the image. Maybe they were slouching, maybe their posture wasn't, Ben's just sat up. But these are all things, so, he just sat up, so unconsciously I know he's ready to listen. You know, so we all make these very, very fast judgments based on our unconscious perception. So all of these influences, our psychological internal world, has nothing to do with the performance of the apprentice, but our internal world has an impact on how we make those judgments. And in addition to our subjectivity, obviously the context is really important. Well, we know this because ancient philosophers throughout history have been telling us that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And in contemporary language, Peter Senge, he's a famous management consultant, and he often uses the metaphor of the elephant. He says, if you divide an elephant in half, you're not going to get two small elephants. Or a range of organs is not a human being. So we know that there is something more, that there's that intangible evidence, there's that invisible evidence in the performance that makes up the whole, and we can't always rely on being analytical and logical. When we're making judgments, whether they are formal or informal, when we're making evaluations, we always use criteria, whether they are unconscious or unconscious. For example, if you want to choose a good restaurant to go and have dinner at, this evening or at the weekend, unconsciously, you might be thinking, well, is it convenient, is it affordable, is it pleasant, do I feel like going there? So all of that feeling, do I feel like going there, or do I feel like not going there, I just want to go somewhere else, but I can't explain why, I don't feel like going to this one. So, we use a combination of our gut instincts or, more tangible criteria like affordability and whatever, but we use criteria to make our judgments. In the situation that I'm talking about with the apprentice, we have a long list of criteria to base our judgment on. And in that first task where the apprentice failed, we had a long list of criteria, and the argument, the controversy, was over two criteria out of many. There were two criteria. The apprentice had to explain the difference between internal and external customers. And he gave a long list of examples of internal customers in the NHS, and he gave a long list of examples of external customers. Those of us who wanted to pass him, we made the judgment, well, yes, we can tick that box. He's talked about internal customers, and he's talked about external customers. But those who wanted to fail him said, but he only described internal and external customers. He didn't explain the difference. And there was a long controversy. We talked for about an hour about this because we were saying, well, it's obvious that he knows the difference because he's given us examples of the two types. And the others were saying, well, no, he hasn't explained the difference. That's what the criteria is. The criteria is explain, and this task was set up to cause this controversy because in this situation, the assessor was incompetent. The assessor was pretending to be incompetent because they were not asking relevant questions, because when this apprentice gave examples of customers, they just asked them a question about, oh, well, do you like football, or something ridiculous like that, So basically not giving him the time to elaborate. And so those of us who wanted to pass him were saying, well, if the assessor had been more competent, they would have had the chance to explain. And those who were saying, well, no, they said he knew what the criteria were, he should have taken the initiative and explained the difference himself. So, you see, some of us like to look at patterns. We're not looking at isolated criteria. We join the dots. The criteria is the dots, but we need to join those dots and look at the broader picture. But some people, they like to just focus on being analytical and looking at the dots, and the joke is like about civil servants. Civil servants like to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and it's our personalities. But this is all part of our subjectivity. But in a context, we need to take that into consideration, that the broader picture will probably give a more accurate judgment than breaking it down into isolated dots. And when we're making judgments, we need to make sure that we're looking at multiple perspectives. In your organizations, you know that there are loads of stakeholders, and every process and system that you think is really useful from a different point of view will look very different. Your customers will view it in a different way. The managers, the senior managers, the owners of the company, everyone will look and make a slightly different judgment based on their perspective. So in the case of the apprentice, the manager of that apprentice might have seen his performance in a very different light to assessors who had never seen him in the natural environment. Not only do we have to change our perspective, we need to see the information the right way up. Maybe some of you have seen embroidery or even like your cardigans like from the reverse side, Freddie. Let's have a look at your jumper from the reverse side. But you know what I mean, like if like a knitted jumper, if you've got the knitted jumper or an embroidered pattern and it's the wrong way, the wrong side up, it's just a mess, isn't it? There's no coherent pattern. It just looks quite ugly. Whereas when you turn it the right way round, then that's when you see the value and the beauty of it. So not only do we have to shift our perspectives, we have to make sure that the information that we're looking at it not upside down. If you try and read a book, some people are good at reading books even if they're turned upside down, but most of us have to have it the right way up. When we're making judgments, the power dynamics are very important. So very often there's a tendency to value ideas that are presented by somebody in a higher position to us, because we make the assumption that if they are on a higher rung of the ladder in the hierarchy, they're earning a lot more than us. The fact that they're earning a lot more than us must mean that they are more highly skilled. They've got more expertise, they're wiser. So we assume that their ideas are better compared with somebody who is subordinate to us, because we think, well, they probably don't know everything that needs to be known about this situation. So in this situation where in a room of 26 assessors, 13 of us were arguing that this apprentice should pass, and the other 13 were arguing that he should fail, we looked to the trainer to tell us who's right and who's wrong. Because the trainer obviously had a lot more experience than us, because that's why they were training us. But when you think about it, their judgment also would be subjective. It was based on their own expertise, and it doesn't necessarily mean it was the right judgment, but because that they had a more powerful position to us, that's why we were looking at their judgment. If they told us, well, if you failed him, you're wrong, that we would agree with that, but they refrained from doing that. Language is very important when we're making judgments. So Peter Senge, again I mentioned him earlier, he says that we see what we are prepared to see. In English, we follow a subject, verb, object, linear structure, which encourages us to see things as cause and effect. But not every language has that structure. Those of us who speak many languages, we know how difficult it can be to translate a joke from one language to another language. In one language there's a lot of humour, but we translate the same words into another language and there's no humour there at all. So not everything is translatable, not everything is perceived in the same way. So some languages are not linear. The Chinese language is not linear, it has a totally different structure. So the way that the perception is, it's not linear cause and effect, like there's more acknowledgement of multiple causes and multiple relationships. So ideas that are presented to you in a language which is unfamiliar to you, or if it's in a language that is not the first language of the person presenting that idea, they might have, the message or the value might have got lost in translation. So we need to be aware that we are all when we're making judgments, we're making these judgments with our own subjectivity, which is our beliefs, our values, and our assumptions, and our perceptions, and our linguistic preferences, and the context. Some of us are making judgments based on isolated factors, and others are making judgments based on looking at whole patterns and forming a synthesis rather than an analysis. So we know that, this is not kind of rocket science. We all know that opinions are subjective, but how do we overcome this in the way we mark assignments? Well, one of the reasons that assignments are marked anonymously is because research has demonstrated that you give an assessor the same assignment with a female name or a masculine name, and even women, so it's like the judges are a mixture of male and female. They'll always mark the male assignment, the assignment with a male name, with higher marks. And so we can break that down. So that's one of the reasons that we mark the assignments. The assignments are marked anonymously, and not only are they marked anonymously, they're double marked. So somebody will mark an assignment, and then another person will check. And in the case of apprentice, don't kind of worry about the fact that I've told you that half and half. You could have failed or got a distinction based on the assessors, based on the same assessor, because there is a moderation process. So you will be assessed by one endpoint assessor, but their work will be overseen, supervised. There will be a recording. The reason that your showcase and your project, your presentation, the reason it will be recorded is so that someone else can see it and check that it's a fair grade. So we have checks and measures in place to overcome subjectivity. And in industry, for example, orchestras used to be very homogeneous, but nowadays, when you go to audition as a musician for an orchestra, you audition behind a screen, so that the judges can't see whether you're male or female, they can't see what ethnic origin you're from, they can't see your age, and that has created diversity in orchestras. So, so there's lots of ways that we can overcome our subjectivity. And how do you? You made a choice about which goal to focus on. Think about how did you choose that? But more importantly, in your organizations, how do you overcome this subjectivity and take the context into account in your own organizations? What checks and measures do you have in place, like we do in education? In education, the checks and measures we have in place is double marking, mark anonymously, make sure that the marks are supervised, make sure they're moderated. If there's any query or complaint, we can go back and think, we can follow the thought process that was taken when the person gave you that mark. Okay?